Okay, it just started now. Okay. Hello everyone, we are with Katia Truijen today as a 10th Vardia of the Architectural Biennale of Venice as a Turkish pavilion. Now we would like to introduce you Katia Truijen. My friend will read about his background, and we are so thankful that she's with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Katia Truijen is a media theorist based in Rotterdam since 2014. She has been developing programs in the field of digital culture and architecture within Het New Institute Research Department. Currently, she's an assistant curator for work, body and leisure in Dutch Pavilion at Biennale Architecture 2018 and managing editor for the forthcoming publication of Architecture Appropriation on squatting as a spatial practice. Katia has published on digital culture and design for many leading culture platforms in the Netherlands. She's graduated from the MA in New Media and Digital Culture at the University of Amsterdam and completed the Art and Research Honors Program at the Rietveld Academy. Previously, she taught at the University of Amsterdam Department of Media Studies and the Netherlands Film Academy. So, Katia, hello, and you have the word now. You can start.
Thank you so much for this introduction. And thank you also for the invitation to join your table there in Venice remotely from Rotterdam, where I am right now. Also, thank you on behalf of Marina Otero-Verger, the curator of the Dutch Pavilion. I don't want to take too much time to talk because I think it's more interesting to have a conversation with you, and I'm curious to learn about your ideas, about what the Biennale does and what it could be. But first, I will try to answer these three questions that have been discussed already extensively within the framework of your project. So why does the Biennale exist? What does it do? And for whom does the Biennale exist? And I will try to address them from my perspective, as in this case, assistant curator of a national pavilion in the Giardini. Because of course these questions are fundamental and they have been on our mind throughout the development of the project. So from conceptualizing what a Dutch contribution to the Biennale could be, to the dissemination of the project also beyond the territory of the Biennale. So very briefly, to introduce Work Body Leisure, the Dutch contribution. I'm not sure if you have already visited the pavilion in the Giardini. You will recognize it by the orange room full of lockers. So Work Body Leisure looks at the emerging technologies of automation, and it addresses the spatial figurations and notions of the human body that are engendered by changes in labor conditions and ethos. So when you enter the pavilion, you will find this locker room, a space that may look familiar to you, as it could be a flexible office space, but also a space of leisure, for instance, in a gym, as we see a lot in the Netherlands, but also in other countries. And these lockers could also be seen as an interface where the human body transforms itself into a laboring or into a non-laboring self. And this locker room is also an interface to the different contributions to the project. So when you open the lockers, you will find spaces where the future of labor has been or continues to be reimagined. So from the office space, where the control room has actually become obsolete, to the bed as a horizontal architecture for work. So spaces in which bodies are categorized and transformed. And the project is very much envisioned as a collaborative research with a national and international network of architects and designers, but also musicians and scholars, schools and other institutions. And we both invited people that have developed fundamental perspectives in connection to the theme, but we also launched open calls for contributions. And the pavilion is actually only one of the manifestations of the project. So many of the contributors have exhibited their projects in other countries around the world, in other exhibitions or biennales. Some have launched open calls themselves for contributions. We also launched a book in conjunction with the pavilion that exists online, And in collaboration with other collectives and museums, we've recorded a series of podcasts to invite more voices. So in a way, the research and the outcomes, they also continue after the closing in November. So beyond the exhibition timeframe and the venue of the Biennale. But to go back to the questions, first of all, why does the Biennale exist? So the Architecture Biennale specifically exists in this form since 1980, and every curator of the Biennale proposes a theme that responds to a current state of affairs in architectural discourse and society, but it's also an invitation to the contributors to respond to this theme. So this year, of course, it's free space. And traditionally, the Biennale is a moment of spectacle also to showcase the state of the art in a field, this case architecture, but also to foster an international debate. And what is interesting is that this model of spectacle and national representation still exists today, also physically, of course, in the architecture of the national pavilions. But of course, like many disciplines, architecture has become a transnational and transdisciplinary practice. So also architectural offices, they hire employees from many countries and they work regardless of time zones. But let me get back to that at the end. So first, the second question, what does the Biennale do? I actually listened back to one of your previous sessions with Professor Tom Avermaete, and he reflected upon how different contributions respond to this question. So he says that sometimes contributions function as a mirror to reflect a current state of affairs and architectural culture in a country. And here he, for instance, mentions the Israeli pavilion. But sometimes a contribution also operates as a diaphragm, where it's not so much about reflecting a current practice, but about questioning the framework of architecture and the role of the practice in other emergent fields. And he also took the Dutch pavilion as an example, where in a way the central locker room invites you to enter smaller rooms to have a discussion about the role of architecture in connection to, in this case, the automation of labor. So the Biennale is an international exhibition with national contributions, but it's also a competition between countries. And when we find ourselves in the Giardini, we met our neighbor pavilions, Belgium and Spain, when we were developing our different contributions. And we were thinking how to work and collaborate beyond the enclosed spaces of our national pavilions. And with the curators of Spain and Belgium, we decided to launch an open call, which we called Outside the Box, to engage students, practitioners, and researchers of all ages and nationalities to develop a site-specific project and to encourage collaboration across borders. So we asked to propose a spatial intervention, really in the outdoor space in front of the three pavilions, during the official opening day of the Biennale in May. First of all, to imagine how the Giardini could operate as a space for knowledge exchange and representation beyond these national demarcations. So also to question this idea of a national pavilion, and then to reconsider what an open ceremony could be. And also, again, to question the tools of architectural practice and to take into account really the skills and the media in which the Biennale operates. So also beyond the physical territory, online and in other platforms, as you are also addressing, of course. And from the 167 entries from more than 50 countries and different backgrounds, we selected the proposal by Central Office for Architecture and Urbanism in Brussels. And they proposed to change the countries' names on the pavilion's facades by overwriting them with the 6 letters of Europa in neon lights, to really evoke the idea of an imagined space of open borders and free circulation, but also of equality and solidarity, and to address Europe beyond the European Union and transcend the identity of a nation state. So that's an example. And that maybe also connects to the last question. So for whom does the Biennale exist? Which is maybe the most critical question that you are asking, as it already implies the exclusive nature of a Biennale. But what I think is interesting is that many contributions this year have tried to answer this question in different ways. So for instance, the Spanish Pavilion, they show or demonstrate architecture as a learning environment and also as a multidisciplinary practice involving students. Or the Irish Pavilion that shows an installation that will travel through Ireland through different marketplaces to instigate a conversation on site about civic questions. And similarly, also the Dutch contribution doesn't start or end in Venice, but really uses the Biennale to foster a transnational discourse and hopefully a collaborative research that continues outside, online, in schools, and venues that traditionally don't address architectural questions per se. So maybe to conclude and maybe to come back also to the first question, why does the Biennale exist? I think what we are actually doing here now to have this online conversation that is also, of course, present in the space where you are in Venice, is quite interesting because we are actually questioning the model of the Biennale as a territory for representation and competition. But instead, we are using the infrastructure of the Biennale or that it offers, which is also an international network of practitioners and thinkers and students and maybe policymakers, but then show or actually then to somehow rewire this into a space for learning and for listening and for conversation. So at the same time, what I found interesting is that you are also creating an archive. So an archive of thoughts around questions that I think really do need to be raised and answered again every new edition of the Biennale. So I would be very curious to learn from you actually what you think about how this edition of the Biennale operates as a platform for knowledge exchange and also transnational collaboration, and also how it allows us to think and invent new modes for collaboration, and to bring these conversations not only beyond the physical frame of the Biennale, but also the time frame. So how to continue. Thanks.
Thank you so much for a really good representation.
Thank you.
Now we have a couple of questions. We have a couple of questions that everybody search in the Biennale and Giardini, so we can start one by one. To start with, I have a really good question. I was questioning about reaching to the people, the public, especially from the beginning of the Biennale. So you also you said that this online courses, the online sessions are really important to share the knowledge of the people who experience these places. So, for example, in the Australian pavilion, I see that there is an endemic vegetation of country that come inside a white box as a exhibition. So online session is a start point of this going beyond of the Biennale. So what could be the next step of the Biennale? Maybe the start point could be a Venice, but it go around the world and come back again to the Venice. Maybe I am thinking about this, and I really curious about your question because you are so long, but you are so here. So this is also the interesting part of this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Maybe you can turn my voice down. So because I heard, thanks, that's better. Thank you for the question. That's very interesting. I think it's really, I think for me, the most interesting thing is to learn also from all the collectives in a way that have been participating in this Biennale and how they have been addressing these questions in different ways. So you are working, of course, with online sessions, which I think is a really interesting endeavor. And as I said, I really like it as a live form of doing live research, but also presenting it at the same time. This live aspect, this live aspect is very interesting. But at the same time, you're also capturing a moment that you can maybe revisit during the next years. So I would be super curious if there's also people who want to continue the project and maybe revisit the same questions in 2 years from now, or 4 years from now, or 10 years from now, because I'm quite sure that the answers to the questions will also change. And in a way, for us, how we have been bringing the project like to other platforms for knowledge exchange, they have also emerged over time. So through collaboration and through inviting other voices, we were then also again invited by them to discuss the theme and the project in different media also, and in different venues and platforms. For instance, last weekend we have been organizing together with the Serpentine Pavilion in London a series of bed-in interviews by Beatrice Colomina. She is one of the contributors to Work Body Leisure. And she has been addressing actually the bed as a horizontal architecture for work. And she invited architects and artists and thinkers to join her in this public space in the park in London to talk about the future of labor and the relation of work and the bed. But this then again is also recorded as a podcast, which then also is circulating online and also evokes different responses. So I think actually this sort of, I almost see it could be like an octopus with different tentacles. So there is different media and different contributors that operate, and I think it's very nice to make use of the different opportunities that also occur throughout these collaborations. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Do I have to? Okay. So you asked us what we think about how this edition of the Biennale operates as a platform for knowledge exchange and sort of transcends the boundaries of time and physical limits. And this is actually really related to one of our questions about the role of media, and specifically digital media, in the future of cities. So since this infrastructure of connectivity used in conjunction with art and in a way in which it can instigate conversation is already causing us to revise our definition of the Biennale and what it means to exhibit something. How do you think we could take this further into daily life outside of the so-called spectacle of a Biennale to alter the future of urban space?
Wow, that's a very, very relevant and big question as well. Like actually, I think for me also in a way, these questions that are raised during the Biennale and all the different contributions somehow they live on in different territories. So in schools where researchers are actually taking up these questions. And I think, of course, like a new media really help us to collaborate throughout different time zones and different media. For instance, at the New Institute, we're also collaborating with different schools, but also art schools that are, for instance, in Rotterdam, you have the Master for Experimental Publishing at the Piet Zwart Institute. And together with them, we're also, and they actually are really interested in what it means to make things public and how technologies can be deployed to make things public, and to also really critically reflect upon the use of these technologies and what that means. So I think that maybe the Biennale as a motor for all these forms of collaboration really also invites us to think about how and which media are appropriate for what kind of collaborations, and also what are the publics that are actually that you can involve with this. What kind of conversations can you establish through which media? And I don't think I have a question. Sorry, I don't think I have an answer. I think at this point I only have more questions. But then again, maybe the Biennale is a moment where you can really share this knowledge and experience of modes of collaboration.
Thank you. Mesela bunu.
Hello. I would like to more convert this conversation into the human participation in social housing, the public participation. How do you see the future of our way of living in technology, and how this is related to the human participation in housings? Or probably the Dutch pavilion is more provocative of this techno living future. And how would you tell the relation?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think one of the questions that is really core to the project is this future of labor. So at the New Institute, over the past years, we have developed this research on automated landscapes, which is also present in the pavilion. And we've been looking at how territories in the Netherlands have become completely automated, for instance, in the harbor in Rotterdam, but also in the agricultural clusters throughout the Netherlands. And these sometimes these terrains are not accessible for human bodies anymore. But what is more interesting is that through automation, the nature of labor is really changing. But this also then affects, of course, the city and the type of work that is being done. So before you had the crane operators that are now mostly replaced by people in the control rooms that are operating these machines from a distance. But then, of course, also like this, the population in cities and is changing because of that. And I think like also what is really key to look at is how cities are actually developed, and of course who has a say in this. So this is also why automated landscapes really invites architects to look at these automated environments, and also how they then affect the city and what the role of architecture could be in that. And then of course that also links back to for whom is the city and this question of social housing. And in that sense, it's always key to look at who is actually creating the cities, and which also relates back to another project that I think you also wanted to talk about, but I can talk more about it later. Yeah.
Thank you.
Kat, can I move on? Okay. 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 You were mentioning about automation. What do you think on thinking of machine and human-centered design? Do you think people will how can I say, that there will in the future there will be lack of connection between machine and the human relationship, or in terms of production of new media or knowledge. What do you say for that?
I think in the discourse that we find now about technology in particular, it's very crucial to look at how technology is actually constructed by humans. So I think there it's always connected, and I think we have already become cyborgs in a way, because we can never leave our mobile phone. But in this question between machine and human centered design, I think it would be interesting to look at maybe one of the contributions also to Work Body Leisure, which is by artist Simone Nikia. And she really tries to look at spaces that are designed and optimized for ergonomic workspaces. And she really tries to see how they are designed and what the technologies are that are deployed to in order to create that. So she's looking at the software that are used to design these spaces, but also she's looking then at the databases underneath that, and to look at the human data that is behind it. So she's looking at the measurements of human bodies, the average bodies, so-called, that are used to design these spaces. And then you see that actually, for instance, these databases are, for instance, based on the US military, or but it's very, you really have to dig deep in order to find out where this data is produced. So we should never take technologies for granted, and yeah, we always have to go back to where actually the data and the softwares are produced, and also yeah, what kind of bias is also involved in that. So what are the voices that are actually constructing this media, and then whom is maybe excluded?
Thank you. And also, I would like to add something to ask you. There is a documentary called Storage, which is Harvard's project, I guess, for the library, new kind of library, which we cannot touch the items, but we can just reach out by internet or with the data. So now the spaces and the interaction with the human, interaction of the human and spaces, between spaces, they are changing. So that we code the buildings for according to their program. So they will, I guess, in the future they will be changed also, or the metaphor that maybe they could be a metaphor on our minds. So what do you think about this one also? The current programs for architecture already has been changing, so in the future it's a big question, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. It's very difficult, I think, to speculate about the future in that sense, because I think with the emergence, for instance, of the e-book, people declared the book dead, but we still have paper copies around everywhere. And I think people have always, tried to think about appropriate spaces for the type of interactions that we have today. And I think in a way it will always be complementary. So the fact that you are actually meeting there in this physical space in Venice, I mean, we are able to have a conversation this way, which is which is a great affordance, I think, technological affordance also. But still, it would not have been the same if I would have been there with you, and if I would have been able to see like all your facial expressions, and to maybe like peek into your notebooks, or I don't know. So yeah, I think in a way that's a feedback loop. So there is always spaces that inform new interactions, and the other way around as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello, Katia. Coming back on when you talked about who should have a say in the design of cities and who should take part, maybe you can also talk about some ideas and your ideas of squatting and your take on the subject. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for this question. Yeah, so since 2016, I've been also working together with a big team of researchers and archivists and collectives on this project, which we call Architecture of Appropriation, where we look really at squatting and the squatting movement as a form of architecture and as a spatial practice. And since 2010, squatting has become forbidden in the Netherlands. Before, it was tolerated if a house or a building or a terrain was vacant for more than 1 year, but now it has become forbidden. And what I mean, a lot has been written and published about the squatting movement from a socio-historical perspective, but we really wanted to look at the spatial interventions and how squatters have imagined new domestic arrangements, but how they also have preserved national monuments and also like participated in the fight for and the right to housing. So we've been working together with different collectives in the Netherlands that are residents of squats or squats that have been legalized over time, to really document and reflect upon the spatial interventions that they made. So together with architecture students from different universities, we have been documenting together with the residents these spatial interventions, and then to also sort of look at this practice from an architectural language, but then to come back with these drawings to the collectives and make annotations, also to, of course, include their voices, but also for them to, make corrections or explain the use of their spaces, how they, for instance, have private, public, but also communal spaces that are very key. And then in parallel, we've been working with the Heritage Department at the New Institute, because we also have the State Archive for Dutch Architecture and Planning, which is really open to architectural culture. So, but at the same time, it mostly consists of archives of architectural offices, and to be honest, mostly male architects. So we really want to look like also from a broader perspective, like what it means to archive architecture, to preserve architecture. And in 50 years from now, when we want to look back at how cities are actually constructed, we think it's very important to also have an idea about how the city has collectively been produced, for instance, by the squatting movement. So the idea is that these drawings, these annotations, and also the conversations and through photography, we will add these places, these territories that are sometimes really under threat of eviction, will also be added to the archive, so future researchers can also go back to them. And at the same time, we also have been fostering like a larger discussion on of course the right to the city, but also the voice of, for instance, the squatting movement in the production of the city. And this will also be a publication that will hopefully be finished by the end of the year. Yeah.
Thank you. And I would also, just to maybe finish this topic about, I have some, since you're more involved with this subject, you might have some opinions on the controversial Torre David, the David Tower in Mexico, which for people who don't know, was a high-rise building built for economic growth in the country, and then was taken over by the squatters, and now it's unfinished and is occupied by them. And there is some topics about the eviction of it, of them.
Yeah. So what would your question exactly be about this case?
What do you think on how the Torre David works, and or how should it work, or basically your idea about it?
Yeah, no, it's of course it's a very controversial and contested case, and in a way, I mean, yeah, how it's used, that's maybe more difficult to say something about it, but in a way, I think we shouldn't also sort of not maybe fetishize is not the right word, but be very careful. We should be very careful, and this is also something that we have been trying to do with our project here in talking about informal architectures, and to be very close to the and very also honest about your position somehow, whether it's an institutional position or more from a residential perspective. Yeah, I will think about it more. Yeah, thanks for this question.
Thank you very much.
Hi again. I have one more question. Actually, continuous of this question of Sinan. I do believe in it's a really good working area to be a square thing, because without the laws or rules that people should be obeyed, what could be the architecture and the housing could be go beyond their beyond the borders of it. But as an architect, sometimes I thought that we do have a vision of for the housing or some events. We are making too dramatic for us as an architect. As a public, I do think that, for example, I am working for my house. I am gaining some money to get it, but in an unrightful way, someone is getting a free space connected with the Biennale, getting a free space without paying any money or sacrificing. And you said that the square thing is an improvement of the cities, but especially in Turkey, it's actually the reason of the death of the cities. They are getting drinking its blood. I think maybe I am too curious about cutting, but I'm really have questions about this. So I need your help maybe, because in Amsterdam, how you deal with it, and how Turkey, because it is really we have a problem for us, maybe more than 50 years or 60 years, especially in the improvement of the cities because of the industrializations. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting remark and question. Of course, I cannot really talk about the situation in Turkey, and that's why it's also interesting to look at like how, for instance, this operates in different cultures and different countries, and in a way, like when you look at the discourse around squatting in the Netherlands, mostly people, of course, refer to it as a. I mean, it's a criminalized practice now, and there's really a discourse that is also really emphasizing the violence that was always involved with it, and this is something we do not shy away for, or that we say is not there, but at the same time it has not been acknowledged so much as like a also like an aspect to look at in how, at least in the Netherlands, cities have developed. So when you look at for instance, a lot of cultural venues in the Netherlands, or the legacy of squatting, you can really trace this back to the squatting movement. And I think in this project we have been more interested in some of the spatial interventions that are interesting also from an architectural perspective, but also for instance, how to operate with and collaborate also with municipalities and other institutions. But yeah, it's a very, very large topic and story, and in this case we wanted to look more at the spatial perspective, but also how some terrains are also still operate as a free space, while this is also being pushed to the outskirts of the city. But it's really interesting that it has so many different local narratives. We've also been exchanging stories, for instance, with Brazil, with Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, where it's very much connected to the housing movement. So there it brings a completely different scale. Or to Hong Kong, where you have farm squats, which actually are located just outside of the city. So I think, for every country and every territory, there's different stories to tell. Yeah.
So much. I think we can finish now. It was really a good, mind-opening conversation for us, with you especially. So thank you so much to be with us for today. Have a good feelings from Venice.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Also, thank you for helping me to think along new lines of thought and to address all these questions. So thanks a lot. I will also continue this here.
Bye.